A pleasant day to everyone. So for today, we are going to talk about conceptual framework and definition of terms. So before I proceed to the discussion, allow me to give credits to the development team of this module to SDO Navotas. So let's begin. For conceptual framework and definition of terms, okay, let's begin with the idea of a research framework, okay? So a research framework would serve as your blueprint. It would serve as your structure for your research plan. So in this case, it would help you navigate through your research study as you formulate relevant research questions and as you try to write and compose different parts of your paper. So this framework would consist of key concepts. And through this, we would also look into the relationships of these key concepts. So it's important that you know where your study is going towards. This would show your understanding of the topic that you have selected. So we also use this as guide for researchers to be more focused on the scope of their studies. So we know we have discussed about scope and delimitation last time. So I assume you still remember the difference between scope and delimitation. So we are practically narrowing down our topic and we are further guided with the research framework. So moving forward, we are also considering the research framework as something that can be presented using diagrams, charts, or any other visual representation. So we're not just fixed with a particular diagram. We could explore other things, but of course, we have to consider and consult our advisor. So it could be the usual IPO or the CIPP, or if we could possibly think of another conceptual framework, again, based on the guidance of your advisor. So it can also be presented narratively using paragraphs, okay, where concepts and relationships of the study are discussed. Usually, this would be placed after the visual representation, okay? And of course, as part of the discussion today, we would also be looking into the definition of terms as you write a research paper. So we don't assume that your audience would already know automatically what the terms that you have used in the study uh, that they already know how they are operationally used. So you have to make sure that these terms are clear to them, that they would understand how these are used. So this would help the readers to understand the unfamiliar and the technical ideas that are being repetitively used in your paper. Okay, so I hope we're clear with that. So let's move further. So for the next part, we have the conceptual framework. So for the conceptual framework, this refers to a specific exploration of an aspect of the study. So this is used to arrive at a hypothesis. So it is an analytical tool that we use to get a comprehensive understanding of a particular phenomenon. So it can be used in different fields of work and is commonly used to visually explain. Again, that's the keyword, visually, for us to be able to imagine, okay, the key concepts and the direction of our paper. So we would present the key concepts here or the variables. We have studied about the variables in our previous lessons and their relationships. Okay. So as we go further, let's erase these. Okay. If we are going to look into the guidelines, okay, according to Barrett 2017, here are the guidelines and strategies that we need to develop a conceptual framework. So first on the list is that we have to identify first the key concepts. So you have to list down your key concepts by referring to your research questions. So if you remember our previous discussions, there should always be an alignment um, with your research questions or objectives, your instrument, uh, and of course your title, okay, so that we would be able to have a clear understanding of the study. So once you have aligned all of those, you should have your key concepts listed already. So again, our goal would be alignment. Okay? Next would be we have to search for existing theories. So we're talking about the theoretical framework here that would incorporate the same concept and look into their relationships. Okay, we could look at existing theories as well. Okay, let's look at how the concepts are related to what we are trying to study. Okay, let's move further to the third guideline. Okay, so for the third one, using the existing theories as guide, okay, which you could also use eventually, you could plot already your conceptual framework. So we really have to stand in the shoulder, on the shoulder of the giant. So we really have to read the theories, the related theories, the existing theories to serve as our guides, so that we would know how to formulate uh, our conceptual framework. Okay? So moving forward, in that case, if there are concepts that are not covered by selected theories, we could then incorporate them. Okay? So it doesn't mean that we have to stick with what is already indicated by the existing theories. We could look into what our study intends to put across. However, of course, there would always be a warning. We have to make sure that we are incorporating this concept in our framework because there's a need for us to do so. So it's not out of whim, it's not out of like a random thought. It should be something intentional and purposive. Okay, it should be purposeful, I believe. So as we navigate through our framework, we have to also consider that after completing the initial draft of our conceptual framework, we have to also write a narrative explanation of each concept and how each of these relates to one another. So it's not enough that we have the visual representation. We have to ensure that our readers would understand what this illustration is all about. So there should be a basis for the relationship between the concepts being incorporated. We could not just leave the representation to their interpretation. We have to provide an explanation, a narrative explanation below, so that they would clearly understand how one concept is related to the other. Okay? So aside from this, okay, after we have drafted our narrative, okay, we have to refer once again to our research questions. We would always return to the research questions, okay? Why are we doing this? For us to be sure that we're still in alignment, okay? There should be the aligned yung research questions with your conceptual framework. So once in a while, you would have to check your general research question, your specific research questions, and then juxtapose these with your conceptual framework. Then check, are they working together? Are they aligned? Do they say the same thing? Okay? Then afterwards, we have to know the process of creating conceptual framework, and it would always be developmental, okay? That from time to time we could refine, we could change. It's not like after you have done it that it's already fixed. No, it would always be a process. Okay, so as you read more, as you look into more theories, as you get to know more about your paper, there could be chances that you could change a part here and there. So in some cases, the research hypothesis is also presented, okay? But of course, you have to double check if there's a need for you to do so. But in some papers, they would present the research hypothesis at the end of the conceptual framework. Okay? So I hope we're clear with that. Moving forward, okay, here are some common examples of conceptual frameworks. So we have the following models. So first is the input process output model, or the IPO. So this is a conceptual paradigm that indicates the inputs, required process, and the output. That's why I is for input, P is for process, O, I mean, is for output. So this approach is seated on the premise of acquiring essential information. So we process the inputs to outputs, okay? So the IPO model is also a functional model that is often used in action researches as well. There's where there is usually an intervention or a solution that is done to solve an identified problem. So if we remember, research is usually done for us to solve a problem, okay? Uh, a problem faced by, let's say, a community, or a problem faced by many people, wherein many people are affected. So inputs, or an input is usually the independent variable of the study. Okay? And then we have the intervention or solution, consisting of the instruments and analysis used to acquire the result. Then lastly, we have the output, and this would be the findings. What are we going to come up with? Okay, what's the outcome of the intervention? So let's look at the example here. So here is the input. So we have indicated social and demographic profile, age, sex, and marital status. Then food safety profile, and then what are we looking into? Knowledge, attitude, and practices. Then the process would include profiling, survey questionnaire, and data analysis. And then, of course, the output would be the proposed intervention program. So again, the input is the independent variable. Here, we have mentioned the social demographic profile and the food safety profile. And then the process would be the tools and the analysis and gathering the data. And lastly, the output is the outcome based on the results of the study. So I hope we're clear with that, okay? You could also search for other examples of IPO. I believe that you'll be able to find numerous examples online, okay? And of course, we have the IVDV model, or the independent variable and dependent variable model. So, example, we have the hours of study as the IV, and then academic performance as the DV. So, for this part, this conceptual framework would show the independent and dependent variables of the study. So it is presumed that the more hours that a student reviews or prepares for the exam, the higher the expected academic performance, or the higher the score that he or she will be getting from the exam. Okay? So it's as simple as this, but then again, because it's about the IVDB, of course, we would have to consider the nature of your research. We would have to consider your SOPs before we jump to, like, selecting the particular model or the particular conceptual framework. We should not select a particular model dahil you find it nice, you find it cute, or whatsoever. Again, everything would have to be selected based on the need of the study and based on the related studies that we see. Okay? So next would be definition of terms. So after that, we have the definition of terms. So this may be a part that is seen to be kind of easy to do, but it's very important. It's very crucial to ensure that there's common understanding when it comes to the key concepts and terminologies between the researcher and the readers. Sometimes it may be something like unclear for you. Why do we still have to define if it's something, if it's common knowledge, if the definition of the word is already known? We have to ensure that the terminologies are clearly defined so that we are on the same page. So what are the benefits of having the definition of terms? So first, it is a useful place to include technical terms in the topic of research questions. So it would make the research questions more understandable to the readers. Aside from this, it can also clarify the definition of the term, okay? But especially if it has multiple meanings. So define the term according to how it was used in the study, okay? Moreover, we have to consider that it makes it easier to revisit or check the meaning of the term instead of locating it through the paper. So we could compare it to a glossary of a book, okay? So if we have a glossary in a book, we also have the definition of terms in a research paper. Moreover, it helps us ensure that the reader can understand the technical terminologies and jargons while reading the paper. Okay? So we have to make sure that we are all on the same page. So what are the guidelines, okay, in writing the definition of terms? First, you have to write a brief introductory statement. So you describe the content of the term or the definition of terms shortly. Okay? And then we list the words or terms that are technical that would be included. Make sure that the variables and the key terms, lalo na yung key terms, especially those that are found in your title, they have to be in your definition of terms. Okay? And then the terms would have to be arranged alphabetically. Okay? And your definitions do not have to be that lengthy. We have to be direct to the point. Okay? We have to give the definition. Okay? So, in this case, you have to provide the operational definition after the conceptual definition. So when I say conceptual, this would be the concept, the dictionary meaning, while the operational definition would be how it is being used in the study. Okay? So you need related cited works, related studies, or definitions from reliable, credible sources. Aside from that, acronyms, initials should also be clearly defined. So complete name should be written first, followed by the acronym or initials in open close parentheses. So if we're working with initials or acronyms, this has to be uh, clearly presented so that the readers would not be confused. And then do not overflow with technical terms. Only choose the selected and the significant to the study. And then, of course, keep the definition brief and basic. So it will be elaborated in the body of the paper. So it's important that it's brief and basic. Do not make an RRL out of it. Okay. Of course, you have to keep it simple. Okay. So I hope we're clear with that. So very easy, but again, very crucial to the research. And then again, as I've mentioned earlier, we have two ways in defining the terms. We have the conceptual and the operational. So the conceptual is the dictionary or encyclopedia meaning, and then the operational would be the meaning of the term based on how it was used in the study. So let's look at the examples here. When we say face to face, the conceptual definition is it is when people involved are being close together and are looking directly at each other. But operationally speaking, we're talking about the modalities used in learning delivery. Like example in education, like where the students and the teachers should be in the same place or setting such as the classroom. Okay? So I hope we're clear with that. So to add more, before we get to the review of related literature in another video, I would add here in the conceptual framework, in the research framework, the theoretical framework. Okay, so there are some uh, writers who would opt to have or who would opt to stick with the conceptual framework, but there are also those who could integrate the theoretical framework. So for the theoretical framework, although it was already mentioned in the conceptual, this is where the researcher would look for related theories that would support the study. These are theories that are evident or seen to be applied in the study, okay, or operationalized in the study. So at times, this is also done separately. But again, we have to check with your institution as to what they prefer, if they prefer only the conceptual or if they prefer to have the theoretical instead or both, right? But at least you would have an idea that when it comes to theoretical framework, you consider the related theory. So how do we write that? So we could have the theory, then you discuss the theory, introduce the theory. You also include the proponent, who's the person behind the theory, and then you could discuss how this could be significant to the study. So it doesn't have to be that lengthy. It could range to 2 to 3 paragraphs. And it's possible for you to have more than one theories in this particular part. Okay? I hope we're clear with that. So if you have further questions or you have things to clarify, you could comment. Okay? So I hope you've learned something for today. Should you have any things to clarify, you could always send a message or comment down. and we're good. So let's see each other by the next video. So have a wonderful day. Bye.